The mid-afternoon update on the progress of Hurricane Irma. You can see it is now approaching the Turks and Caicos. These are the islands north of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, south of the Bahamas. There's the center, the eye of the hurricane, approaching those southeasternmost islands still as a Category 5 storm. So we have hurricane watches, warnings, tropical storm watches and warnings in effect. So let me expand the view. You can see here in this brightest shade of red, including the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, the northern coast of Hispaniola, that's Haiti, the Dominican Republic, all under hurricane warnings, meaning hurricane conditions are expected here shortly within the next 24 hours, sooner in some parts of the Turks and Caicos. Hurricane watch up now for the southern tip of Florida, Lake Okeechobee, and the Florida Keys, as hurricane conditions are expected there as we head into the weekend. So here's the latest. Sustained winds at 175, gusts to 215. Still a very powerful Category 5 hurricane moving across the Turks and Caicos tonight, tomorrow morning. Here we are still as a Category 5 hurricane north of the eastern tip of Cuba. From there, near the southern, southwestern Bahamas, Saturday morning, still as a very powerful Category 4 hurricane just below that 4 or 5 threshold Saturday morning. And then that sharp turn to the north, it's going to be critical to time out exactly when that turn occurs. If it happens early, the ultimate track will be farther to the east. If it happens late, the track will be a little bit to the west. But for now, the expectation is it turns and approaches South Florida, Miami, that area, as a Category 4 hurricane with possible landfall occurring Sunday morning. And then tracking very near the coast, a path similar to Matthew last year, if you recall that. This is Monday morning, just east of Jacksonville or St. Augustine would be the center of circulation. It still is a major Category 3 hurricane, but the margin of error once you get out here 4 days starts to get fairly wide. So there are threats for inland or farther offshore. And then beyond that, possible landfall of a major Category 3 hurricane along part of the Georgia or South Carolina coast. That's a possibility. And then weakening once it moves over land to becoming a tropical storm by Tuesday. So I know a lot of questions out there, and one of the main questions is, what are the impacts for us in Metro Atlanta and North Georgia? If it takes this track, now that's a big if, we're talking 5 days away, but if the center of the storm passes to our east, the risk for tornadoes for us will be very low. That would be to the right of the track out towards the east. And we'd have gusty winds, of course, squalls of rain. And with a track like this, I'd expect about 60-mile-an-hour gusts possible in the northeast Georgia mountains, and winds gusting to around 30 miles an hour or so in parts of Metro Atlanta. That's if it takes this track. If it's a little farther west, we'd have more wind, more rain, and increased threat of tornadoes, and we'd have lesser impact if it travels farther to the east. So I understand we have a few questions now. Go ahead. What's the first one?
Savannah.
About Savannah? Okay. So the question about Savannah is, as you see the line, the official track from the National Hurricane Center puts the landfall very near Savannah. That's a possibility, and so those folks there along that part of the Georgia coast need to prepare for a Category 3 hurricane making landfall. Now, it certainly could be up the coast a bit, Hilton Head, Charleston, even towards Wilmington, North Carolina, or it may be a little farther inland. We just don't know yet. That's why we show you not just the official track, but the cone that represents the average margin of error. But the governor earlier today did issue an evacuation order for the coastal counties of Georgia east of I-95 in anticipation of some significant impacts towards Monday of this coming week.
What would you recommend for people trying to get out of Savannah, what timing-wise?
So the question was, what would I recommend as far as timing for leaving Savannah? I would say sooner is better, although it's not urgent at this point. Just we know that traffic is already getting bad, and it's only going to get worse. I think the weather conditions in Savannah will start to deteriorate on Sunday as some of these northern bands approach, but the worst of the weather not going to get there until Monday. So you've got at least a few days, certainly into the first part of the weekend, where around Savannah and coastal Georgia, you could take preparations. If you board up your home, if you're down there on the ocean, you want to make some of those preparations. So spend a little bit of time to do that, and then I think if you're on the road Friday or Saturday, you'll be just fine. Just understand, of course, traffic's getting worse.
How does this compare to Matthew?
So the question about how this compares to Matthew. The track is very similar, except you remember with Matthew, it came up towards the Georgia and South Carolina coast and then kind of hugged the coast and turned to the right. So that's a slight difference. The other difference is It was weaker as a hurricane. At this position, as it was passing Jacksonville in northeast Florida, it was a Category 2 hurricane, and then weakened to a 1 as it approached the Georgia and South Carolina coast. So this is expected to come in as a Category 3 hurricane, and then not really weaken until it moves inland. So I would expect the impacts to be much more significant. Both wind, storm surge flooding, coastal erosion, all of those things with a track like this would be much more significant than what we saw in Matthew in many locations, especially near and to the right of where that center ultimately comes ashore. Again, let me emphasize, we're talking 4.5, 5 days away. There's some margin of error here. So the strongest winds, that was the question, where are the strongest winds in a hurricane? They would be right at the eye wall. So let me just step out of the picture, but hang with me here. I'm going to pull back up an image that I can show you here this a little more clearly. So let me do that, stand by, and we'll put this satellite image back into motion here. Now here's what I want to show you. Here's the eye. Right in the eye, in the center, the wind is calm, but the eye wall, the strongest winds encircle that eye. So that's where we talk about maximum sustained winds of 170 miles an hour. That's not over this entire area. That's just a small area right around the eye wall. And in particular, to the right of the track, the right of the forward motion. So you take a look at this, headed to the Turks and Caicos. To the right of that is to the north. Later, when we talk about it moving northerly, to the right is to the east. So really that turn to the north near South Florida this weekend is going to be critical for determining the type of impact it's going to have in metro Atlanta, North Georgia, the Georgia coast, the Florida Peninsula as well. So we're going to have to watch that very carefully. I'm getting new information, be going through that data, and I'll have an update for you coming up on Channel 2 Action News at 4. We'll see you then.